Genesis chapter 1, we have the account of the creation. And we see in a series of what are described as days, and I don't care whether you think they're 24-hour days or what. I don't want to get into that this morning. But certain things are described as taking place on a certain day or a certain time in a certain way that God calls out of nothing and puts the world in order. And obviously he's preparing it for the crown of creation, which of course is human beings. And he wants everything in place so that human beings can be sustained, that they can have a place to live, and that everything will go well. Well, after he has created the animals and so forth, and this is on what would be the sixth day of creation. Starting with verse 26, God says, "Let us make man in our image and our likeness." And so God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. You know, that's a challenging statement that's made there. God made us, male and female, in his image. You know, we sometimes have an expression to describe a child that looks like somebody else. It may be a parent, it may be a grandparent, it may be a brother or sister. You know, say, boy, he or she is the spitting image of, and then we fill in the blank. And what that says to us is that when we see that child, we see them, but we see somebody else too, because they remind us of that other person. It may be a look, it may be an expression, it may be the way they walk, it may be the way they talk, but any number of things say, boy, that's just like so-and-so. And so when we see the person, we think of somebody else. Well, God made us to be like him. And he wants us to portray what he is like to other people. And so when we see each other, we get an idea or a glimpse, an indication of who God is and what he's like. And that's in a special way for both male and female. And in 1 Timothy chapter 2, Paul is placing some restrictions on how things are to be done in the church. And he's talking about some teaching roles and what's going on, and we're not going to discuss that this morning. But he says that, you know, women are to have a different role and a different responsibility than men have. But then when you go to the 15th verse, he says, nevertheless, or in spite of all this, he says, a woman will be saved through childbearing if she remains faithful and true in her faith. God gave women a special gift, a special responsibility. And when he said she'll be saved by childbearing, he wasn't just simply talking about the fact that she can have a baby. That's not the gift. I mean, the gift, yes, is having a baby, but it's what's entailed in that. It's not just giving birth, but it's the role of being a mother, of influencing and training and teaching and providing for and protecting. All the things that go into being a mother. When we think back to years behind us, some of our best memories relate to our mothers. It may be the things that they cooked, although that certainly is, while they're good memories, they're not by far the greatest of them. But we think of what that person was. We think of their love. We think of their care. We think of the time that they spent with us. We think of their influence. And we need to thank God for that. And that's a special role. And You know, I enjoy our children. And I believe I have a special place in their hearts. But I would also be fooling myself if I think that they don't maybe feel a little closer to their mother in some things than they do to me. Because she was able to spend time with them and do things with them differently than what I did. And while we each have an influence and a role, I would say that her role is probably greater. And when we look at the readings this morning, Paul is thankful to Timothy for his faith and for his salvation. And he wants to remind him about what he believes. And but you notice what he says? He says, it's a faith that first was present in your mother and in your grandmother. Then you come up to 2 Timothy chapter 1, and he identifies them. He says it was in your grandmother Lois and in your mother Eunice. And he says, now, this is a faith that's able to save you. And he says, because it was in your forebears, in your mother and in your grandmother, and you spent time with them and your influence, I'm sure that that faith is yours too. It doesn't mean that Timothy hadn't studied. Doesn't mean that he hadn't made things on his own. But because of the influence of his mother and his grandmother, Timothy was the person that he was. And Paul says, I'm thankful for that. And he had said earlier that this was a special gift that God gave to women. And so when we think back and we remember, we can be thankful. And some of us may still have our mothers and fathers with us. Some of us don't. To some, we'll be had a chance to spend some time with them today. For some, we won't. And so we're thankful for our mothers and for the opportunities we have. And so while we think about it, I want us to look at two particular things this morning in which our mothers bear the image of God. And there are many ways that they are like God, but two things we want to notice in particular this morning, and that they remind us of God. And these are things about God that are certainly important. The first thing we want to talk about is that God is a God of comfort. One of the things that maybe we remember the best about our mothers is that our mothers were comforters, they were encouragers. When we were hurt, who came to check and see what was going on? Who usually had the pat on the back or the hug or a kiss to make it better? It was our mothers. Dads, oh, buck up, come on, get with it. It wasn't always that way. We try to be sympathetic, but mothers have a special ability to be sympathetic, to be understanding, to be compassionate, and to share that. And that's a special gift that God has, and it's a very necessary gift. And that's one way that mothers in particular bear the image of God. In 2 Thessalonians chapter 1, or not 2 Corinthians rather, chapter 1, Paul expresses a blessing or a praise to God. Chapter 3, verse 3, he says, "Praise be to the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of compassion and the God of all comfort, who comforts us in all our troubles, so that we can comfort those in any trouble with the comfort that we ourselves have received from God." God is identified here particularly as being a God of comfort, a God of encouragement, a God of compassion. And that's a very special thing that we can learn from our mothers. Comfort, compassion, encouragement. I remember lots of times if the kids fell and hurt themselves and they would come running into the house, it wasn't me they wanted to see. They wanted to see their mother. And sometimes I was a little bit jealous, maybe even a little bit hurt that, well, aren't I a person? Aren't I your parent? But see, I wasn't mom. And mom had a special gift in that way. And she could reflect to them God. And so when they think back about the fact that they could receive comfort and encouragement and strength and consolation from their mother, that says to them as they get older, God is a God of comfort and encouragement and strength. And he says, that we can take the comfort and the encouragement that we have received from God and give that to other people so that when they're in trouble, when they're hurting, they can be strengthened and encouraged and built up. And that's something we can learn from our mothers. And that's something that we can come to understand what God is like. It's one thing to read something. It's another thing to experience it. Brian, do your football players learn better by you telling them what to do or by getting on the field and practicing it?
I guess it depends how you say it.
Okay. But normally we learn best by doing, don't we? There is a place for verbal instruction or for reading. And like Brian, it depends on how we say it. You may say something, and then if you illustrate it, it backs it up. And we learn by doing. And so we can learn to appreciate that God cares about us because of the care that we've received. Matthew chapter 11, Jesus says, "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I'll give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in spirit, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Jesus didn't say that we wouldn't have burdens. He didn't say that we wouldn't have troubles. He didn't say that we wouldn't have trials, but he said, bring them to me and I will give you rest. I will give you comfort. I will give you strength. Philippians chapter 4, Paul talks about his experiences in life. He says, I've been on top of the world and I've been down in the dumps. I know what it's like to be hungry. I know what it's like to be well fed. I know what it's like to be rich. I know what it's like to be broke. Now that's Randy Moore paraphrasing. You're not going to find those exact words, but I think you know that that's what he's saying, isn't it? And he says, I have learned in any and all circumstances to be content. He doesn't say I've learned to be ecstatic. He doesn't say I'm going to be jumping up and down and saying, yay, I love it. He said, I have learned to be content. I've learned that, Shania Twain says, that doesn't impress me much. There are things in life that we face, good, bad, positive, negative, up, down. But we're the same person, aren't we? We have to face all of these things. And Paul says, I have learned by my experience to be content. No matter what comes along, I have learned to be satisfied. Are there things in life that upset us? Yes, there are. Are there things in life that make us sad? Yes, there are. Are there things in life that get us angry? Yes, there are. But we can learn to control all of those emotions and feelings because we have learned that they're not there. They're going to come and go. And Paul says, he concludes with that, he says, I have learned to be content in every situation. He says, I have learned by my experiences. And then he concludes the thought in the 13th verse. He says, I can do all things through him who gives me the strength. It doesn't matter what situation we face in life, we can face it with confidence that God is there and that God is in control. Romans chapter 8 and verse 28. Paul says, and we know, we are confident, we are sure that God works in all things for the good of those who love him, who are called according to his purpose. You know, sometimes we've heard people express the thought that God sends us every experience. Well, some of the experiences we go through must make God seem like a very cruel and harsh and an uncaring God. Why would he do this to me? Now, you know, we say, you know, why do the good suffer along with the bad? And, you know, we can get philosophical all we like about it. But there is good and bad for all people, isn't there? The rain falls on those who deserve it and on those who don't deserve it. And the sun shines on those who deserve it and on those who don't deserve it. That's a fact of life. But to see God as one who would send some very harsh and cruel experiences, that's not totally fair. A lot of times what we are experiencing is a result of our own choice and our own doing. God gives us the right to choose. He doesn't take that out of our power. And if I want to run into that wall with my head, I'm going to suffer the consequences of it. But God's not forcing me to do it. That's a choice he lets me make. He's not going to set a pillow up there to stop me. But I can make some choices that are, you know, the wrong choice. Do we ever find ourselves, you know, maybe beating ourselves up a little bit and say, man, that was stupid. Why did I do that? Or say, well, he deserved that or she deserved that because of the choice that they made. No, God doesn't send us evil. But what he does promise is that he will be there to help, to encourage, and to bring good out of it. And so I think of Paul, for example, in 2 Corinthians chapter 12. He's saying, you know, I have had all kinds of high experiences. And I've been on top of the world. He says, I've had visions and revelations. And he said, but to keep me from being too elated or too swell-headed, I received a messenger from Satan. Notice the source of the message is that came from Satan. Satan wanted to bring me down. Satan wanted me to be destroyed. And he said, and so I asked God, God, take this harassment, this messenger away from me. And God's answer to me was, my grace is sufficient for you. Paul says, I came back a second time. God, take it away from me. My grace is sufficient for you, Paul. A third time, Lord, I don't like this. Get rid of it. My grace is sufficient for you. And Paul said, you know something? I learned that was all I needed. I needed God with me. I needed his strength. I needed his help. And then when I am weak, then I am strong. You see, Paul was a very capable man, very well educated. He had all the credentials that made him somebody in the eyes of people. And so he needed to realize that his strength was not in himself, but until he faced a problem that he couldn't overcome, he didn't realize how much he depended on God. And that's where his true strength was. And so we need to go through experience knowing that God will bring everything for good. Think of Joseph when his brothers sold him into slavery and he went down into Egypt. He said, you meant that to harm me. He says, God brought good out of it. God was behind it all. He says, it worked out because God was there. And so when we look at this, God is a God of compassion. God is a God of strength. God is a God of encouragement. And we learn that from our mothers. Our mothers are always there. They never turn their backs. No matter how much we might resist them, No matter how much we might frustrate them, no matter what nasty things we may at times say, they don't give up. A mother's love is always there. And so they show us that God doesn't give up, that God is always there, that God can be relied on for comfort and encouragement and strength. I can read that in the scriptures, but when I have experienced it in my life, I can come to appreciate that God is a God of comfort. And my mother bore that image in my relationship with her. But not only is God a God of comfort, but we also learn from our mothers that God is a God of nurture. To nurture means to feed, to educate, to train, to protect. And when we're very young, and as we get a little older, we can do more for ourselves, it lessens to some degree. But our mothers were there to see that we had what we needed by way of nourishment, by way of protection, by way of education, by way of everything, really. We didn't always like the meals that were there, but there were things we needed to eat. If we were allowed to just simply eat what we wanted, we'd be in trouble, wouldn't we? I like chocolate. I like licorice. There's lots of things I like, but I need meat and fruits and vegetables and other things. And my mother saw that they were available. And yeah, even sometimes that I ate them whether I wanted to or I didn't want to, because they were necessary. And I learned to like some things that I didn't think maybe I would. Maybe I like them too much. And I've got a few extra pounds to show for it. Now, she's not around doing it for me anymore, but I never did get over the fact that I liked it. And so I was nourished with proper food and proper drink. She saw that even when I didn't want to, I went to school. And I learned and I got the education. She could teach me so much, but there are certain things I needed to get from a trained professional. Now, we made a bargain when I was in high school, particularly my last grade there, my last year there, because I really wasn't enjoying it. And I wanted to be just kind of rid of it. And that bargain was that I was allowed to take off every other Friday. And the reason I was allowed to do that was because I had a job and we got paid on Thursday nights every other week. And so every other Friday, I couldn't go to school because I had business to attend to. And that was the bargain, because I had to go to the bank. I had to put my check in. See, we didn't have automatic deposit at those times, at least not where I was working. And so we bargained and I got to do, but when it wasn't my week to be paid, I was expected to go to school. And I'm thankful for that, because I was only allowed to go to school when I wanted to. I probably wouldn't have gotten the education and the training that I needed. I was also expected to be involved in activities that weren't always just fun, but things of service to the family, to people around, to help them, because that was part of being a person and relating. And so my mother trained. That's not to say my dad didn't have a role in it, but my mother was the dominant person in that influence, and in her encouragement and her prodding. Sometimes the encouragement was, get out there and do it. And other times, you really should. But that's what she did. Well, you see, God is a nurturer too. God sees that we have everything that we need. 2 Peter chapter 1, we're told that God has given us everything that we need for life and godliness through our knowledge of him who called us to his own glory and excellence, through which we have received his very precious and great promises, that through them we might escape the corruption that is in the world caused by sin and become partakers of the divine nature. Everything that we need for life and to be godly, God has given us. God is a nurturer. God provides. God strengthens. God encourages. We read, come to me for rest. He also says, cast your cares upon me, for I care. God is seen in our mother. Our mother's cared, our mother's nurtured, and God is a nurturer. I can understand some things about God because they were exhibited in my mother, and you can too, and we can all think of different things. But this morning, let's be thankful that we have a God who comforts and who strengthens and who encourages, and a God who is a nurturer and sees that we have all that we need, that we can be the people that he wants us to be.